This is one of my favorite stories in all the scripture. Luke 10, beginning in verse 38, Jesus and his closest friends are traveling, and they stop on the way headed to Jerusalem. They stop at someone's house for a meal. And in Luke 10, 38, it says this: as Jesus and the disciples continued on their way to Jerusalem, they came to a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. Her sister Mary sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he taught, but Martha was distracted by the big dinner she's preparing. She came to Jesus and said, "Lord, doesn't it seem unfair to you that my sister just sits here while I do all the work? Tell her to come and help me." But the Lord said to her, "My dear Martha, you are worried and upset over these details. There's only one thing worth being concerned about. Mary has discovered it, and it will not be taken from her." I love this story, and there's really two characters that teach us something here, but I want to focus on each of them for a minute, the first being Martha. Martha is distracted, okay? That's pretty obvious. This Bible story even tells us she's distracted. In fact, the original language of the story tells us that Martha is busy with things. In fact, Martha's so busy with things, she forgets who she's with. Like, Jesus is there in the house, and Martha's like, "Oh my goodness," right? "What are we gonna have for dinner?" She's busy with things. Isn't Martha so relatable? I mean, somebody else agree with me that if you read the story, you're like, "I wish I was Mary, but I'm kind of Martha," right? The one in the story freaking out. And what does Jesus say to her? He's like, "Martha, you're so concerned over all these details, and there's really only one thing worthy of your concern." Here's what I want to say, though. We can criticize Martha all day long, but Martha's doing the very best she knew how. Because Martha thought her busyness was the best display of her devotion to Jesus. She thought, "I'm serving him. I'm doing all the things he wants me to do." But what Martha didn't realize is that Jesus didn't want Martha to do anything for him in this moment. Jesus just wanted Martha. He wants her attention. He wants her focus. Jesus doesn't want her tasks. He doesn't want her accomplishments. He just wants her. And for some of us, this is pretty relatable. In fact, some of us followers of Jesus, if I can just be really honest for a minute, we have gotten really good at doing things for God instead of just being with God. We are really good at serving. We are really great at showing up to volunteer. We're really great at leading others. And all those things are good things. But if we're really honest, it's been a long time since we actually sat with Jesus. We have worried over every detail. We have stressed out so much about what was happening around us instead of who was with us. And sometimes for good reason. I mean, Martha had a good reason to be freaking out. She didn't want to let Jesus down. I mean, if you were having Jesus over for dinner, what would you serve? Honestly. You're not like, ramen, sounds good. SpaghettiOs. She has good reason to be freaking out, but Martha hadn't realized yet that's not what Jesus wanted from her. He didn't need her perfection. He didn't need her trying to control everything around her. Jesus just wanted to be with Martha. And followers of Jesus, those of us that try to serve him with our whole heart, we should try to serve him with our whole heart. But some of us need to hear this morning, he doesn't need your accomplishments. He just wants you. But let's flip the script to Mary. Mary is sitting at Jesus' feet. Rather than running around like Martha, Mary is sitting at the feet of Jesus. In fact, some versions would use these words, Mary has chosen. The word there in the Greek is eklegomai, which means to choose one thing out of many options. Don't miss that. There's lots of choices for Mary in this moment. Jesus is not the only choice. She could have been running around, she could have been distracted, she could have chosen so many other things to give her attention to. In fact, an important note, just culturally in this time, people normally sat on chairs, just like we do, or on couches. But disciples would sit at the feet of their teachers. And where is Mary? See, Mary would have been expected as a woman in the culture to be preparing a meal. She would have been expected to be hospitable towards Jesus. That was like culturally important. Hospitality of great cultural importance. And Mary's role as a disciple of Jesus in this moment is more important to her than anything else she could do. And so even though everyone around her would have been expecting her to serve and to make a meal, that would have been seen as her role, Mary chooses. She chooses to learn from Jesus. She chooses receiving from him was more important than anything else she could do in that moment. And she chooses the most important thing out of the many options she had, Jesus. And what's the result of that choice? Jesus says, these things can never be taken from her. Never. Let that sink in. There's a lot of things that could be taken from Mary. Her health, her ability, her possessions. There's a lot of things that could be taken from you and me. But what Mary received from Jesus could never be taken from her. And so Jesus celebrates this choice of intentionality from Mary. Even when Martha comes over and she's like, it's not fair, right? Look at her, tell her to come help me. Jesus is like, no. And he celebrates Mary's decision. See, Mary's learning how to abide. Not just do things for Jesus, but to simply be with him. To receive what he had for her. So we're gonna give grace to Martha because we've all been there. And we learn from Mary, who models so well to us what is actually the most important thing. See, John 15 and Luke 10 both lead us to a few really, really, really important observations that I just want to point out to us about abiding. The first is this: abiding is an invitation to get present. Somebody say, get present. See, to abide is to be present, to be fully aware. I just wonder how much of our lives are marked by moments of being fully present with God and others. If you had to rate how present you are any given day, what rating would you give yourself? What rating would the people around you give you? Like, it's one thing to be physically in a room or physically with people, but it's another thing to be fully present to those people, because Martha was near Jesus. She was so close to Jesus, but was she really with him? Her proximity might have been close, but her posture was not with. I mean, a great way to practice this could be just 5 minutes of intentional silence a day. And just notice where your mind goes in silence. Because I don't know about you, but for me, it takes maybe maximum 10 seconds for my mind to wander. Followers of Jesus, are we present? In a world where everything is fighting for our attention right now, we know a thing or two about that, don't we? Followers of Jesus, we will have to fight for the right things to have our attention. Because we cannot be present everywhere at once. So where will we be present? Abiding is an opportunity to get present with God, to open our eyes to him, to be aware of what he's doing and saying to us, to make space for him. So we're gonna have to get present. Somebody say, get present. If we want to become the version of ourselves God desires for us to be, we're going to have to get present. And not only that, but abiding is an invitation to stay with God when much of the world is telling us to leave. Somebody stay present. We're gonna have to get present and we're gonna have to stay present. And let me tell you, this is the hardest part, staying. It's one thing to abide deeply with Jesus or remain with Jesus for 5 minutes or 5 days. But Jesus wants life with us. Not just a day here or a day there. I mean, we know this as humans. Consistency is the hardest thing. Think about the gym. I don't even have to say anything else other than that. Our habits, our commitments to ourselves and others, commitment is easy for a short time. But how about for a long time? I mean, if you give me a 3-day workout plan, I'm gonna crush that plan. But if you give me a 3-month workout plan or a 3-year workout plan, it's all over. I think about the people in my life who I admire so deeply, who've been married for 20, 30, 40, even 50 years. Staying present. My friend Mitch always talks about how faithfulness is only formed over time. We can't microwave faithfulness. God has been so faithful to us over the course of our lives, and the question is, how will we stay with him? How will we remain? How will we dwell? How will we be unhurried on purpose in God's presence? Because to abide isn't to receive like an energy drink of awesomeness from God and then run on to the next thing. To abide is to stay. To stay present, to stay listening, to stay faithful. And I wonder what the things are that try to pull you away from abiding with God, from remaining with him. For me, it's my anxiety. My anxiety tries to convince me that I can do all things on my own and that I should. My anxiety tries to convince me that no one can provide for me or sustain me or take care of me but me. My anxiety tries to convince me that I got this, and even if I don't got this, I've got this. But isn't the opposite true? Like my anxiety tries to tell me, you don't need to stay with God, you gotta stick up for yourself. You don't need God to help you in this moment, you gotta stick up for yourself, and it's just not quite how it goes. If anybody's seen Inside Out 2, spoiler alert, they introduce new characters. I apologize if you haven't seen it. And anxiety is one of those characters. There's this like little orange creature just spinning around everywhere. And they're like running this little girl's mind, and anxiety is just like, I was like, wow, they looked into my brain to create this movie. That's crazy. But my anxiety tries to tell me, you don't need to stay with God. Abiding with him won't help you. I wonder what the thing is for you that tries to convince you don't need to stay with God. Your self-sufficiency. I got this. I can do this on my own. Or even good things in our lives, like work. While a good thing that pulls us away from the great thing, I just wonder what it is for you. It would be good to name the thing that tries to pull us away from remaining deeply with God, because followers of Jesus, we're gonna have to get present and we're gonna have to stay present. In the John 15 passage I read earlier in a different translation, Jesus says, make yourselves at home in my love. Make yourself at home. If you make yourself at home somewhere, that means you're gonna stay a while. We gotta be people who stay with Jesus. We gotta stay with Jesus. And finally, abiding is an opportunity to look back, look around, and look ahead, to see where God is and to anticipate where he will be.